decision and strengthen its unity and solidarity, maintaining their refined manners and their progress despite the fierceness of the campaign launched against them and their country. I reiterate my thanks to the sisterly and friendly countries which recognize the significance of respecting the sovereignty of states and the rules of international law. We appreciate their positions which were and remain supportive of the Qatari people during this crisis. Mr. President, terrorism and extremism are among the most serious challenges facing the world. Countering them requires all to carry out a concerted action against terrorist organizations and their extremist ideology in order to maintain security for humanity and stability for the world. The governments of the world have no choice but to cooperate in the security confrontation with terrorism. But halting the initiation of terrorism and extremism could be achieved by addressing its social, political and cultural root causes. We also must be careful not to make the fight against terrorism an umbrella for reprisals or shelling of civilians. The fight against terrorism and extremism was and will remain a top priority for Qatar. This is exemplified by the effective participation of the State of Qatar in regional and international efforts through the implementation of the measures included in the United Nations strategy adopted back in 2006, as well as the implementation of all Security Council resolutions and measures related to countering terrorism or financing it. We've also participated in international coalitions, regional organizations, and nurtured bilateral relations with the United States and many countries of the world to that vein. The State of Qatar will continue its regional and international efforts in this regard and will develop them. While reaffirming our condemnation of all forms of extremism and terrorism, we reject tackling this phenomenon with double standards according to the identity of the perpetrators or linking it with any particular religion, race, civilization, culture or society. Mr. President, the issues facing the Middle East continue to pose the greatest threat to international peace and security due to the vital importance of this region to the world. Israel still stands in the way of achieving a lasting, just and comprehensive peace and rejects the Arab Peace Initiative. The Israeli government continues its intransigent approach and strategy to create facts on the ground through expanding settlement construction in the occupied territories, Judaizing Jerusalem and restricting the performance of religious rituals in Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is a serious, provocative act. It also continues to impose its blockade on the Gaza Strip. The international community must give high priority to the resumption of peace negotiations on the basis of ending the Israeli occupation of the Arab territories within a specified time frame and reaching a just, comprehensive and vital settlement in accordance with the two-state solution agreed upon by the international community based on the resolutions of international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative. This will only be achieved through the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the basis of the 1967 borders with Jerusalem as its capital. I renew my appeal to the Palestinian brothers to complete national reconciliation and unify positions and words in confronting the dangers and challenges facing the Palestinian question and the future of the Palestinian people. Mr. President, the international community remains unable to find a solution to the Syrian crisis, despite its consequences and serious repercussions on the region and the world. Political efforts continue to falter due to the conflicting international and regional interests. This confliction is conducive to protect those against whom we're supposed to stand united. The international community relinquishes its legal and moral responsibilities, including the implementation of its decisions, in submission to the logic of force. What's required is to seriously work to reach a political solution to the Syrian crisis in a way that meets the aspirations of the Syrian people for justice, dignity and freedom, and maintain the unity and sovereignty of Syria in accordance with the Geneva I decisions. Qatar will spare no effort in providing support and assistance to alleviate the humanitarian suffering of our Syrian brothers and to implement our humanitarian pledges within the framework of the United Nations. The international community has given up the task of protecting civilians. Will it also hesitate to hold war criminals accountable? Their impunity would have dire consequences on the situation in Syria and the region, which would affect the behavior of future dictatorships towards their peoples in the absence of any deterrent. Turning to the Libyan question, Libya's national consensus, which would preserve Libya's unity, sovereignty and social fabric and restore its stability, could be achieved by means of combining domestic and international effort. We must all intensify efforts and support the Government and National Accord, which has been established with the support of the United Nations, in its effort to restore stability, counter terrorism, and its grave consequences. The State of Qatar has supported international mediation efforts and will support them in the future to meet the aspirations of the Libyan people. Concerning the brotherly country, we support the efforts of the Iraqi government in its endeavor to achieve security, stability and unity of the territory and people of Iraq. We commend the achievements of these people in their fight against terrorism. We affirm our necessary support to complement their victories by realizing the aspirations of the people of Iraq to equality among all citizens and restore its role at the regional and international levels. Concerning Yemen, we affirm the importance of maintaining Yemen's unity, security and stability and ending the state of infighting and war while adopting dialogue, political solution and national reconciliation as a basis for ending this crisis and implementing Security Council Resolution 2216. We call upon the international community to facilitate the access of humanitarian assistance to various Yemeni regions. The State of Qatar supports the efforts of the UN envoy to end this crisis and realize the aspirations of the brotherly Yemeni people in unity, security and stability. In order to achieve security and stability in the Gulf region, we renew our call that has already been launched from this podium for conducting a constructive dialogue between the GCC countries and Iran on the basis of common interests, the principle of good neighborliness, respect for state sovereignty, and the non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. Mr. President, within the framework of the international efforts to face up the humanitarian crisis, the State of Qatar has continued to contribute in the international response to the growing humanitarian needs in the world at large. We have increased our financial contributions to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the OCHA, to enable the United Nations to implement UN programs and provide humanitarian relief to those in need worldwide. Today, the State of Qatar ranks third on the list of major donors in the year 2017 to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. We have continued to provide support to countries facing challenges to help them implement their development plans. It's worth mentioning here that the State of Qatar ranked first in the Arab world and 33rd in the world in the field of human development. This proves the effectiveness of our humanitarian and development policy. We look forward to achieving the goals of the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda, which we have all committed to achieve. In conclusion, we reiterate that the State of Qatar will spare no effort in strengthening the role and effort of the United Nations to achieve what the international community seeks, bringing in peace and security and promoting human rights and advancing development. Qatar will remain, as is always the case, a safe haven for the oppressed, and we will continue its mediation efforts to find just solutions in conflict zones. Thank you, and may Allah's peace, mercy and blessings be upon you.
On behalf of the General Assembly,
Yes, we just listened there to the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani there, speaking to the world leaders at the General Assembly at the United Nations. There was many subjects there in his speech, especially the blockade against Qatar, Syria, Myanmar, fight against terrorism, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and he started his speech with calling on Myanmar to resume the responsibility and to stop the violence there. The blockade against Qatar was the main topic of his speech. He said Qatar is managing successfully its economy and it's a success. The blockade was done without warning and they thought it would bring Qatar to its knees, but it hasn't. And that's the embargo that's been imposed by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain and United Arab Emirates, that it's an assault against a sovereign state. That's what Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani mentioned there, the Emir of Qatar, in his speech. And we are just waiting for the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to speak. He's coming onto the podium right now at the United Nations. He will speak to the world leaders at the General Assembly there.
I have the honor to welcome.
As you can see there, he's being introduced, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's speaking after Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Emir of Qatar. Let's just listen in now.
Sayın Başkan, Sayın Genel Sekreter,
Honorable President,
değerli
Honorable
devlet
Secretary
ve hükümet
General,
başkanları,
distinguished
kıymetli
heads of
delegeler,
state and government,
sizleri şahsım
esteemed
ve
delegates,
ülkem adına
I greet you with respect on behalf of my own self and my country.
71. Genel Kurul Başkanı sıfatıyla
I would like to thank Mr. Peter Thompson for his successful work over the past year as he was the president of the 71st session of the UN General Assembly. And I also would like to congratulate Mr. Miroslav Lajčák, who has taken over the presidency of the General Assembly this year. I hope that this year's session of the General Assembly, convening with the theme of focusing on people striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet, will bring goodness to all of the world's peoples. Honorable President, esteemed delegates, unfortunately, global peace and stability have regressed further since our meeting in this hall last year. We continue to see the ugly face of terrorism and of war in different corners of the world. Terrorists who are fed by the environment of conflicts continue their acts, spreading them across different regions. We are anxiously observing the violent actions of radical currents converging on xenophobia, cultural racism, and animosity against Islam. The most effective way of reversing this negative outlook would be to engage in a sincere cooperation here under this roof. We need to develop a new perspective to promote world peace. No crisis, no threat can possibly be resolved by leaving it to play out on its own. We all have to shoulder responsibility for a safer and more prosperous world. It is with this understanding that Turkey is pursuing an enterprising and humanitarian foreign policy. Honorable Mr. President, esteemed delegates, the Syrian conflict entered its 7th year. This conflict has created deep wounds in the country, the region and the whole world as well. In Syria, a whole civilization is being annihilated, together with civilians and innocent children. Destroying this country and being fed by instability and oppression, terrorism now spreads like a cancer across borders. The people of Syria who took action demanding democracy, freedom, justice and a bright future were unfortunately left alone by the international community.
Hangi kökenden, hangi
Turkey
meslekten olursa olsun,
could not remain indifferent to this tragedy of these people, whom we see as our brothers and sisters, regardless of their origin or creed, and to whom we are connected with deep historical ties.
Suriye'de çatışmaların başladığı
Since the outbreak of the conflict in Syria in the spring of 2011, we have exerted every kind of humanitarian and political effort to solve the problem, and we will continue to do so.
3 milyonun üzerinde
We
Suriyeli
are currently hosting more than 3 million Syrians and more than 200,000 Iraqis in our country.
ülkede kalıcı bir ateşkesin
We have
sağlanması,
launched, together with Russia and Iran, the Astana meetings
tüm kesimleri
with the participation of all conflicting parties in an attempt to establish a permanent ceasefire and peace in the country.
olan Cenevre
Following our initiatives also, the Geneva process, which was blocked for a long time, has been revived.
güvenliğe kavuşturulması
We are putting into practice now a new plan to ensure the security of the Idlib region in Syria within the framework of the agreement reached in Astana. Turkey would be supportive of every step towards the construction of a stable and prosperous Syria, based on the territorial integrity of the country and on respect for the democratic demands of its people. Dear friends, we have taken and we will continue to take all kinds of measures for those who came to our country with the outbreak of the Syrian crisis and to stem the influx of refugees into Europe. We meet all the needs of these people, from shelter to food and clothing, from healthcare to education, at standards that are appreciated by everyone who visits our country. But I would like to underscore that we have not received sufficient support from the international community, especially from the European Union, for the efforts that we have been carrying out. The expenditures of our public institutions, of our civil society organizations and our people in order to meet the needs of those living in the camps and cities in Turkey have so far exceeded $30 billion. In turn, the European Union has sent only 820 million euros out of the 3 billion plus 3 billion euros that they in fact promised. Total assistance from the international community through the United Nations remains around $520 million. These do not come into our budget, mind you. This money goes, and they are intended for the Syrians, I should point out. They are intended for the Syrians. None of this money goes into Turkey's budget. This money is given to those in need by the relief agencies through the relevant institutions of the United Nations, mind you. Before the whole world here, I here call on the countries and international organizations which have put all the burden of the 3.2 million people on Turkey's shoulders only. I call on them to fulfill the promises they have made. In fact, Turkey is a country that carries out humanitarian aid and development assistance activities around the world. Not only do we welcome those who come to our country, but through TİKA, which is a Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency, through the Disaster and Management Authority of Turkey, and through the Turkish Red Crescent and various other civil society organizations, we rush to the help of all those who are suffering and who are under oppression, regardless of which part of the world they may be. For example, through its official institutions and civil society organizations, Turkey has spent $1 billion for the reconstruction of Somalia so far. The work that we carry out and the results that we have achieved in Somalia would indeed set an example for similar efforts. According to confirmed OECD statistics, with $6 billion of humanitarian and development aid in 2016, Turkey ranked as the world's second largest donor and top contributor in terms of GNP. Yet, Turkey is the 17th largest economy of the world. Having spent 0.8% of its national income for humanitarian assistance, Turkey is one of the 6 countries that could meet the UN target. So, as you see, Turkey is working real hard towards a sustainable world, which is the main message of this General Assembly. And we will continue in the coming days with the same consideration in mind. Honorable Mr. President, esteemed delegates, Turkey is engaged in an intensive fight against the bloody terrorist organizations of the region, such as Daesh and PKK, nourished by the instability in Syria and Iraq. Additionally, our fight against the FETÖ terrorist organization, which attempted to change the legitimate and democratic regime of Turkey by a bloody coup, is also ongoing. We have recovered 243 residential areas and a land which is larger than 2,000 square kilometers, thanks to the Operation Euphrates Shield, initiated in Syria following the attacks of Daesh on our borders. We have neutralized almost 3,000 Daesh militants during that operation. Around 100,000 Syrians returned to and resettled in the region that we cleaned up from the terrorists. The Operation Euphrates Shield is the single greatest accomplishment against Daesh since its occupation of the region. I must highlight the following fact in your presence. Most of the groups and forces claiming to fight against Daesh in the region, in fact, have no such real purpose. These groups and forces use Daesh as a pretext to just realize their own agendas. The efforts by PYD, YPG to change the demographic structure in the regions it has captured, to seize the property of the people, to kill or exile the ones who stand against it, all of these things form a crime against humanity. If the fight against Daesh is not conducted on a legitimate basis, it would be unavoidable for the world to come under the threat of a new Daesh-like entity. Similar approaches exist in Iran as well. Iraq also needs the compromises to be reached on the basis of territorial integrity and the realization of the ideals to build a common future. Steps such as demands for independence that can cause new crises and conflicts in the region must be avoided. We here call on the Iraqi Kurdish regional government to abort the initiative that they have launched in that direction. Ignoring the clear and determined stance of Turkey in this matter may lead to a process that shall deprive the Iraqi Kurdish regional government even the opportunities they currently enjoy. We all should work on building tranquility, peace, security and stability in the region instead of sparking new conflicts. Esteemed Mr. President, dear delegates, besides Syria and Iraq, we are also closely following the regions such as Libya and Yemen, where terrorist organizations are trying to establish influence. International community's support to the legitimate government in Libya shall contribute significantly to the stability of the country. It should be kept in mind that if the mistakes made in Syria and Iraq are repeated in Libya, then that will expose the whole world, particularly Europe, to much greater threats. Another issue that Turkey lays delicate emphasis on is the immediate resolution of the conflict which has erupted in the Gulf region. We believe that the sanctions negatively affecting the living conditions of the Qatari people should first of all be lifted. We support the mediation efforts of the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah, for the resolution of the crisis. Our hope is that these efforts would yield a positive result. We also hope that Saudi Arabia, whom we see as the elder brother of the Gulf region, would show a sincere will for the resolution of this issue. Another important problem is the issue of Palestine, which we consider to be the gaping wound of the world, and by extension, the preservation of the historical status of Jerusalem and Al-Haram al-Sharif, i.e. the Temple Mount. The crisis in Al-Haram al-Sharif in July has demonstrated that the sensitivity of the issue. The continuation of the peace process there can only be possible on the condition that Israel immediately stops illegal settlement activities and takes steps towards a two-state solution. So in this context, I call on the international community to support our Palestinian brothers and sisters in Eastern Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza as they struggle for an independent and geographically unified Palestinian state. Despite the current absence of conflict, the Balkans is another potential crisis geography which still faces serious challenges. For this reason, we attach great importance to the integration of Balkan countries with the Euro-Atlantic institutions. Turkey will continue to do its part for peace, stability and welfare to prevail in this exceptional part of the world. The territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and of Georgia is the key for regional stability in southern Caucasus. So we need to work harder for the resolution of the conflicts in Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. We should never forget that each crisis that we ignore today has the potential to spark a regional and even a global crisis tomorrow. In this framework, I would also like to underline that we are against all sorts of nuclear weapons, which have come to increasingly occupy the world agenda in recent days. It's obvious that we could not overcome such problems unless